So, how can we actually be certain about what we know? I mean, really, truly certain. It's one of the biggest, most fundamental questions you can ask, and it's a quest that has been driving human thought for thousands of years. We're going to dive right into that quest and trace this epic story of how we've tried again and again to find the answer.
And this is really the central problem, right? The big philosophical challenge that gets this whole journey started. Is the world that you experience with your senses, what you see, what you touch, is that the real world? Or is there something else going on, maybe something behind the curtain? The single question set the stage for 2,000 years of debate, and how you answer it, well, it changes absolutely everything.
Okay, so our story begins with the first great conflict in Western thought. It was a real battle of ideas, set by the earliest Greek thinkers who made this incredible, revolutionary leap from explaining the world with myths to explaining it with reason. Now, these first thinkers, the pre-Socratics, were called physicists, not like today's physicists, but because the Greek word physis means nature. They completely broke away from telling stories about gods to explain things. Instead, they looked right at nature itself for the answers. And they were all searching for this one thing they called the arche, a single underlying principle or substance that could explain everything else. A rational explanation for, well, everything. And what's so fascinating is how quickly this search split into two totally opposite camps. On one side, you've got Heraclitus. He argued that reality is all about constant change. As he famously said, everything flows. I mean, our senses tell us the world is always in motion, right? But then, on the complete other side, you have Parmenides, who said that pure logic demands the exact opposite. He argued true reality, or what he called being, has to be one single unchanging thing. And his radical conclusion? All the motion we see with our senses, it must be just an illusion. You literally could not get two more different answers to the same question.
So this clash between what our senses are telling us and what logic seems to demand, it left philosophy at a total stalemate. I mean, if you can't trust your senses, but pure reason leads to a reality that feels completely wrong, where do you even go from there? The answer was to shift the whole focus away from the cosmos and onto the one thing doing all the thinking, the human mind itself. So with the nature of reality totally up for debate, this group of thinkers called the Sophists came along, and they basically concluded that, hey, if the greatest minds can't even agree, then maybe there's no single absolute truth to begin with. Protagoras nailed this idea with his famous line, "Man is the measure of all things." Essentially, he was saying that truth is subjective. It's relative to each and every one of us. So, in a world that's suddenly filled with all these conflicting opinions, how could anyone find real, stable knowledge? This is where a really critical distinction comes into play, one that's going to define the next whole phase of philosophy. The Greeks separated doxa, which is just, common belief or your personal opinion, from episteme, which is true, justified knowledge, something solid, something you can count on. And then came Socrates, who took on the challenge of the Sophists directly. His solution was totally radical. It wasn't to look out at the world, but to look inward. He developed this method he called meiotics, which literally means the art of the midwife. Think about it. A midwife doesn't create a baby, she just helps it to be born. Socrates believed that through relentless, tough questioning, he could help people give birth to the true knowledge that was already inside them, pushing them way beyond mere opinion, or doxa. Now, Socrates' student, Plato, took this whole idea of an inner truth and built an entire philosophical system around it. His famous Allegory of the Cave, which you see right here, is just the perfect metaphor for his theory. Plato argued that there are actually two worlds. First, there's the physical world we see with our senses, which he saw as a flawed, shadowy imitation of reality, kind of like the shadows on the cave wall. But then, he said, there is a higher, perfect world of unchanging forms or ideas, the real things that are casting those shadows. This higher world is where all truth comes from, and you can only get there through reason, not through our unreliable senses. But what if Plato was wrong? What if the senses weren't a barrier to truth, but the actual starting point? Well, that was the revolutionary idea of Plato's most famous student, Aristotle, who brought the whole quest for knowledge firmly back down to earth. Unlike Plato, Aristotle completely trusted the senses. His method was what we call inductive. For him, all knowledge begins with observation. You start by carefully observing individual things out there in the world. Then, your mind starts to identify common patterns and similarities between them. And from those patterns, you abstract a universal concept or definition. So for Aristotle, the physical world isn't some distraction. It's the essential raw material you need for knowledge. And to make absolutely sure our reasoning about the world was solid, Aristotle invented a formal system to govern it: logic. His key tool was the syllogism. It's a structure for an argument that guarantees that if your starting points, your premises, are true, then your conclusion has to be true too. And this wasn't just some academic game. It was a powerful weapon against the fuzzy, anything-goes kind of arguments of the Sophists. It gave people a real framework for certainty.
All right, so after the fall of Rome, the quest for knowledge faced a brand new challenge. The question wasn't just about senses versus reason anymore. Now it was about how this incredible Greek philosophy could possibly be reconciled with a powerful new force: Christian faith.
This timeline really gives us a sense of the monumental historical shift we're talking about. As the classical world of antiquity, with all its schools of philosophy, gave way to the Middle Ages, the entire intellectual landscape just changed. The dominant institution became the church, and for the next 1,000 years, philosophy and theology would be tangled up together. One of the first great thinkers to try and bridge this gap was Augustine. He was deeply influenced by Plato. And remember, Plato believed true reality was in a higher, non-physical world. So Augustine saw knowledge as this internal process. This quote just captures his view perfectly. Faith comes first, giving you the certainty that your reason then tries to understand. For Augustine, true knowledge wasn't just found through logic, it was a gift, illuminated by divine grace deep inside the soul. Centuries later, another giant of medieval thought, Thomas Aquinas, took a very different path. Instead of Plato, he turned back to Aristotle. And this slide shows the contrast beautifully. While Augustine prioritized that internal journey of faith, Aquinas argued that faith and reason were two totally compatible paths to the very same divine truth. He brought the value of the physical world roaring back, arguing, just like Aristotle, that all our knowledge has to begin with our sensory experience of God's creation. This was a really profound synthesis that would shape Western thought for centuries to come. So we've journeyed all the way from the first philosophers trying to explain the stars to the inner world of the human soul, from the ironclad rules of logic to the guiding light of faith. Each step built on the last one, shaping the very way we think about truth and reality today. This incredible legacy leaves us with one final question to think about. In our own lives and in our own time, where does this timeless quest for knowledge lead next?